This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast. If you've lived through difficult things, you know that it changes you. Some of these changes are unwelcome and unwanted, and I believe that the gift of growth is available to us in every life experience, especially the hard ones. And today's episode is about how to grow, not in spite of the challenges you face, but because of them. And I'm glad you're here. Energetic attunement today is brought to us by no other than Philip Glass. We are all vibrating to his gorgeousness right now. This is his Religion album, which is available along with all of his work on Bandcamp, philipglass.bandcamp.com. I chose this piece for us today because I feel like it really captures the emotional quality of what we're going to be talking about today, which is post-traumatic growth. You know, there's this seriousness to it, obviously, this intensity, but also this hope, this beauty, this movement, I think, is what it also involves. And that is where we're going together today, my friends. And I wanted to record this episode for a couple of reasons. First of all, it is such an important topic. There is not one of us that gets through this life without going through difficult things. And, you know, there's one part of healing from trauma that is very valid, and that's coming back to some semblance of baseline, which is very important, and we need to do that. But there is also the next chapter that can come after traumatic experiences. And I think when it is possible, we all deserve to achieve that so that we are taking the things that we have gone through. And, you know, even though we do not wish that they had happened, oftentimes are able to find the value in them and utilize these life experiences in order to help us achieve our fullest potential and grow and mature and, you know, ultimately be better people because of it. And I also wanted to mention that I had recorded an episode on this topic many years ago. I think it was probably like 5-6 years ago, maybe. There was a great interview. I talked to a wonderful woman who had been through some difficult life experiences and who then developed a career as a comedian as a way of kind of managing it. But it was great. We talked about a lot of important things. And, you know, my thinking about this has evolved in the years since. And so I wanted to revisit this topic with fresh eyes and do another exploration here for your benefit. So let's just dive in. Before we do, I will be mentioning many different articles, other podcasts that I've recorded. They're all available for you on my blog. If you go to growingself.com/blog-podcast, you will be then presented with a choice to enter the Love, Happiness, or Success collections. Go into the Happiness collection and then look for Emotional Wellness. That's where you'll find a link to this episode, you know, the article that we're writing for it, all of the links, but also all of the other articles and podcasts that I'll be mentioning today, as well as links to some of the exercises and activities that we'll be talking about today to support you on this path of growth. So all there for you, and now you know where to find it. Okay, so just to jump right into this, there's so much potential for growth in all things. And I, over the course of my many years as a marriage counselor, psychologist, a coach, have come to have the utmost respect for the power of dark emotions, difficult life experiences, the challenges that we face. You know, I think As you reflect on this, I know this is certainly true for me. When I'm bopping down the road and things are fine, I'm not thinking that much about, what needs to change and who I am and my values and where is all this going. And, it's really when we get pushed into crises is when we really make contact with, whoa, like this is how I feel. This is who I am. This is what is true for me. I have feelings of anger, pain, fear, even. It's when we go into these spaces that we understand a lot more about ourselves, about our world, about our needs, even. One of the reasons I think I did really want to re-record this episode is when I recorded this topic all those years ago, I was living in a state of privilege that I wasn't even fully aware of at that time, meaning that I had not experienced a truly traumatic loss yet. My cat died, I had gone through difficult relational experiences, certainly. My grandmother died. But as many of my regular listeners know, you may know this, my mom passed away suddenly and traumatically 3 years ago now, which is crazy to think about, but it was like nothing else I had ever experienced. The trauma, the grief, the shock, the remorse, the everything. It was so deep, so powerful. It helped me understand, not just myself, but also I think a new level of appreciation for the many, and most people, all really, who hasn't experienced some loss sooner or later, but having access to this club all of a sudden that nobody wants to be in, but here we are. But there was a lot of meaning and beauty in that, because I think of the level of empathy and understanding that came from that experience, but also recognition of the fact that my experience of being an adult with a relatively nice, stable life and losing a mom who's pushing 80 is also a very different life experience than somebody who's had a traumatic accident, who was a victim of a crime, who lost a child, lost a partner, lost a sibling. The loss, the trauma that I experienced was still in the natural order of things in some ways, even though it was a surprise, was not totally unexpected. And so again, I think in that recognition that the experience that I lived through was also not, and again, we don't want to compare traumas or life experiences to each other's, but some things are more difficult than others. And people can also have different life experiences and experience them very differently. I've talked to people for whom losing a cherished pet was more emotionally traumatic and difficult for them than going through a divorce or, recovering from breast cancer. So it is the lived experience that ultimately defines our experience with all of these. And I want to just extend a very special and heartfelt thank you to one of my listeners, actually took the trouble of writing me an email to point that out. She had listened to the first iteration of the post-traumatic growth episode and wrote to me and said, remember that part when you were talking about how people often come to feel grateful for the difficult life experiences that they've had because ultimately they were a catalyst for growth? She was like, Dr. Lisa, basically, F you. She did not say that. She was far more polite. She said, I felt angry when I heard you say that, which is, thank you very much. But, it's so valid that trauma is nothing that anything should experience. And while sadly it is often ubiquitous for us in this lifetime, it's a tragedy. It is a horror. It is nothing that anybody wants to sign up for. And what we're going to be talking about today, this context of post-traumatic growth, we need to put it in its proper place, which is to say that we all deserve to be safe, We deserve to be happy. We deserve to stay connected to the people that we love the most. We deserve health. We deserve happiness. And to go through something that is so difficult, to experience just an irreparable loss, you won't ever be the same. And for me to suggest that at some point in the future, you could come to feel gratitude and appreciation for the life experience of this terrible loss was really quite ignorant of me. And so while I do have compassion for my former self, I am grateful to have had the life experience that was and is difficult, but that has helped me gain more compassion and understanding so that I can be a better friend to you and a better therapist and not glibly talk about the silver lining when in reality it's awful to go through, but also feeling so incredibly grateful for you and the fact that we're in this together and that you care enough to get in touch with me and tell me how you feel and what you think about the things that we are talking about together on these episodes. I am very sincere when I say that I do make these for you. I am thinking about what would be most helpful for you. And for me to have your feedback is fundamentally important to my growth process and our ability to co-create this podcast together. So thank you. So I do want to be very careful to frame this. Trauma is never positive, right? And and I'm sure you too, have met and loved people who have lived through truly horrible life experiences. I mean, the kind we all hope we'll never have to face. And maybe you've lived through some of these yourself, right? And what I have also seen is that people with the right support and the right assistance that helps generate healing and growth is that they can often come out the other side of this, not only in one piece, but also having experienced deep and meaningful personal growth that touches every part of their lives. I see that with clients, and that has also been my lived experience. Would I do anything to have my mom back? Yes. And I have been fundamentally changed as a result of this life experience. And I think in some positive ways. I really do. So let's talk about what this looks like. People, you maybe, who've lived through difficult life experiences will often find that in the midst of the pain and the rage and the fear and the things, there is a reservoir of strength and resilience inside of you that you didn't know you had before you lived through this. And a result, one of the things that people often encounter is a heightened appreciation, not for the losses or the appreciation for the time before the trauma, right? But also for themselves and their own inner strength and abilities. And I am not going to tell you that whatever you've lived through is ultimately all for the best and to look for the silver linings, because this is not, we're not talking about why trauma isn't awful. But I do want to have a conversation about the fact that difficult life experiences can coexist with another reality that fosters growth, resilience, gratitude, appreciation, and that especially if you've lived through difficult things, I believe that you deserve to experience the rewards that are available, even if it is not, what you would have wanted. You would rather be living in a different reality right now. I get that. And it's not my job to try to talk you out of that fact. I mean, that's just true. And since we are here, what I can offer you are some ideas that can help you find and embrace and cultivate the things that are available to you now, that are positive, that you deserve. You deserve to have that. So I know we've talked about the experience of trauma on other episodes that we'll refer you back to in that emotional wellness collection. And there's actually a podcast playlist that I put together for you on Spotify. You can access it there. But when we've talked about, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that is the kind of trauma that you'll find in the DSM. And it's a psychiatric condition. It is, going through a trauma can actually change your brain in such a way that you have intrusive thoughts and then, a lot of energy going into avoidance. So it's that intrusion, avoidance, and it can really interfere with day-to-day life in a big way. And there are also relational traumas that are very common and often quieter and that don't get talked about as much, but can have a similar impact on people. Losses certainly can be very traumatizing, and losses maybe not always death losses, but there are so many losses that we can encounter: divorce, loss of health, loss of a job, loss of career, And again, there are different degrees of trauma. Trauma is in some ways dose dependent, the more catastrophic the trauma or the longer that it persists. If it is, a years or decades worth of traumatic experiences compared to one isolated event, that makes a difference. Also, the amount of control that you have in those moments makes a difference on how traumatized you are at the end. But also, there are meaning factors and there are internal ways of experiencing the trauma that can also change the way we experience the aftermath too. And our brains record traumatic memories differently. When I said a minute ago that trauma changes your brain, was not being hyperbolic right there. That it actually, traumatic memories are recorded in different parts of your brain. They are different kinds of memories. They impact us differently. They're often not narratives. We do not often have a coherent story, but we remember what the air smelled like. We remember what, somebody's shoelaces looked like. Like, it's kind of weird, fragmented, super intense memories. But oftentimes we're flooded by the feelings of the trauma that not connected to a thought. And those feelings can be so terrible. And that's oftentimes what then turns into avoidance, protection of the memories, of the feelings that come up, refusing to go places or talk about certain subjects or listen to certain songs. And you can experience trauma triggers that are so subtle that, the old deep parts of your brain recognize them and react to them before your conscious mind even knows what's going on. And so all of this, as you can imagine, has a profound impact. And it is very, very important that you get involved in excellent, evidence-based, trauma-focused recovery work with a psychologist or other licensed mental health practitioner who knows what they are doing. If it is helpful to you in finding this person, because I am actually not this person. I understand trauma and I can talk about it knowledgeably in this kind of context, but I identify as a marriage and family therapist. I specialize in relationships. I went into coaching as a career trajectory, and I, even though I am a licensed psychologist, do not identify as a clinical psychologist. So, and you deserve to have that. I did write an article about evidence-based practice that you can find on my website, growingself.com/evidence-based practice, about what to look for when finding a good therapist. And it's very important that you do connect with a professional who can help you do the very specialized kind of therapeutic work that is required to heal from PTSD, those traumatic responses, the brain changes that we have just been talking about. So please check out that article to inform yourself about what to look for and what to avoid that will help you make educated decisions about how to choose the right practitioner because not every therapist specializes in trauma work. And that is not me. Now, I will say that there are a couple of counselors in my practice Growing Self who do have specialized training and experience in trauma therapy. And they're licensed in Colorado, though. So if you are in Colorado and would like to talk to one of them, you can get in touch with us and be connected to them. But anyway, I just wanted to say that really openly. And that to highlight the takeaway here is that to achieve what we'll be talking about in this podcast episode, the idea of post-traumatic growth, it is fundamentally important. The prerequisite of achieving post-traumatic growth is to go through a process of healing and recovery from the trauma itself. So that is reprocessing those old memories using techniques like EMDR, trauma-focused CBT, exposure therapies, even somatic therapies can all be very, very helpful. So that is like step one. But then, and this is where I actually do come in. So when it comes to post-traumatic growth, that assumes that, the symptoms of trauma have been, if not done away with altogether, they're at least well managed. You might still have intrusive thoughts or tendencies to avoid, but it is not impairing your ability to function or impacting your day-to-day life in the way that it was. It feels more manageable. And that is also not where it ends for most people. So it is not just about symptom reduction, although that is certainly the first priority. It is the opportunity then to, once we're feeling kind of stable again, then we can do a totally different kind of work, which is exploring this experience in a different way from a position of strength, to think about, what did this teach me? How did this change me? What do I understand about myself, the world, my values, love, my purpose, my sense of meaning in this world? And how do I work with those things very intentionally in order to develop them? Because the other thing is that when we go through very difficult life experiences, yes, there can be repair work, but it also opens this door, this window of opportunity for growth that is not always available to us. If you get, 10, 15, 20 years away from this trauma, it was healed and just sort of left it there, that window is going to close again. You're not going to be thinking in the same kind of intense way about your values and the meaning of love and the purpose of life, right? You also will begin to lose that connection to those big feelings that trauma brought with it. That can also be a very valuable source of information for you. So it's a cool opportunity to dig in when the time is right. Do not push yourself into this place before you're ready to do it, but to figure out, okay, how do I enhance this? Because with the phenomenon of post-traumatic growth, and this is also documented through the research, when people are supported in going through this kind of growth process in the aftermath of trauma, which is, not just the healing, but the rebuilding of old things, but also the building of new things, it can feel like being reborn. There is a time before the trauma, and then there is this transition, crisis, moving into the chrysalis like a butterfly, a transitional period. And then on the other side of that, people feel changed. They feel different. And my hope for you is that that change includes beauty and strength and meaning and love and purpose, perhaps even a strengthening of spirituality that you didn't have before. So how to do this? First of all, the most important thing that we can all do in these moments is to understand that this is an active process And it won't just naturally happen necessarily. Sometimes it does, but there are things that you can do to support yourself in this process. And one of them could be, yes, working with a clinical psychologist on the healing and recovery. And then maybe you can stay with that person and do this work. Or perhaps connecting with a counselor or coach who does specialize more in that growth trajectory. We're not reducing symptoms, we're focusing on growth, and it could be, getting involved in personal growth work, reading books, listening to podcasts like this one, but really deciding for yourself that you deserve to have this experience. You deserve to make something of this tragedy that you have lived through, because that is true. But I think that involves, saying, I'm worth it. I deserve to have something, I can build something, and there are ways of doing this, and understanding that it is an active process. Once you have achieved that mindset, one of the most important and valuable things you can do to cultivate that post-traumatic growth is to have self-compassion, understanding the fact that you've been through something very difficult, having total self-compassion and self-acceptance for all of the dark experiences that came with that. Great opportunity to develop a mindful self-compassion practice. I did record a podcast on that topic a while ago, and it's really centered on finding forgiveness. One of the things that trauma often brings with it is regret, self-blame. Could be blame of other people, but there's often this interesting guilt or even shame component around, if I had done something differently, or why did I stay in that situation as long as I did? Or if I had just seen this coming, so easy to do the Sunday armchair quarterbacking on your own life, right? And to really kind of come into that growth mindset, though, requires a lot of self-compassion. And this is first, validating the traumatic nature of what happened to you without minimizing it or telling yourself that you shouldn't feel how you feel is incredibly important. But also then I think being compassionate with yourself in the aftermath of it, as you now feel maybe more fragile, more hopeful, but also just more aware and compassionate, I think, too, for the new person that you're evolving into. There is no place for self-judgment in this work. And also, just to say this out loud, no place for the judgment of others. You may have people in your life who have a judgmental stance or viewpoint or narrative, and you can certainly maintain relationships with those people, but also being consciously aware that they might not be emotionally safe people for you right now, and that an important aspect of self-care is to have healthy boundaries around different kinds of relationships. So, for example, you may have people in your life that feel safe and nurturing and accepting when you can talk about how you really feel, and that's wonderful. And there may be other people in your life that you cannot do that with. Either they shut you down and minimize and, want to change the subject, or, bring up things that make you feel worse than you already do. So you do not need that right now. And understanding the difference between different kinds of relationships can then help you make choices about who to be vulnerable with and who to not be vulnerable with. Who do I just want to go to the movies with? That's okay. Another piece of this, too, is that in the aftermath of that trauma, healing, and recovery, and honestly, sometimes part of it, there is a space for and a need for grieving. Grieving can be a very common response to trauma and can oftentimes become more apparent, more real, more present as the symptoms of trauma, the intrusion and the avoidance, as those are managed and we feel safer again, that's actually when the real grief starts to come. And it's often, I think, related to the sense of loss, maybe that was actual loss. You lost a person, you lost a your health, lost a relationship. But there is also, I think, a loss that comes, just adjusting to this new life experience. I don't know about you, but I remember feeling that way. I might not be old enough to remember, but after 9/11, that was such a collectively traumatic experience for so many of us. And certainly part of the grief was for the tragedy and the loss of life. And my cousin was killed in that tragically and awfully. But also there was this loss around feeling less safe in the world in a very new and visceral way. I think feeling more, that I could be in an office building and some maniac would decide to fly a plane through the window. That's a thing that happens. In the time before, that was never a thought in my head. So there are all kinds of different losses. And what the work of grief is really allowing yourself to connect with the truth of that and to feel sad for it. When we push that grief away by, avoiding these feelings, trying to keep ourselves from feeling sad or upset or angry or whatever the things are, it feels in the moment like we are protecting ourselves, because dark emotions are often by definition painful. But in doing so, we also unintentionally stay stuck in order to move forward. Part of what is required is allowing those feelings to flow through you and to work with them, to take meaning and information from them and not stay stuck in them either. I think that can be a subconscious narrative for people many of the times. If I allow myself to feel as sad and angry and, heartbroken as I really feel, I am going to fall into this hole and I will never crawl out again. I will never not feel this way again. So, and if that is the case, if that is part of the narrative that's keeping you from doing this important work of grief, that would be an indication that you would benefit from enlisting the support of a therapist. A therapist can help you feel safe enough with your own emotions in order to be able to do this important grief work. It is important. It is valuable. Oftentimes, if we are allowing these grieving feelings, what will naturally emerge from this process is new ideas and awarenesses and understanding about meaning. And making meaning out of our experiences is one of the key components to cultivating post-traumatic growth, and also personal growth in general. But to cultivate meaning begins with developing a new narrative about what happened, but also why. Why did this happen? What does it mean? What does it mean to me? What has changed? What did I learn? What is different about what I believe now about my life, about myself, about what I want to happen next, about the kind of person that I want to be? What is the impact that I would like to have on this world in my short time here? And oftentimes the answers to those questions are actually found in the things that we try to so hard to avoid, which is that grief, which is those big feelings. So when we allow those feelings, we also allow this understanding, this inner wisdom. And so this is a time to do some journaling, to maybe be talking to people or spending time even on your own, but allowing yourself and encouraging yourself to be actively constructing your own story, this new story out of your own experiences. It can be very empowering. And one of the things that you may notice as you do that work is that you begin to feel safer. You begin to feel more hopeful again. There's light in the world when we start to create new meaning and new hope, and then finding a big why. It is also very important, though, to be gentle with yourself and not push yourself into this kind of work. We can encourage growth, but we cannot force growth. I think of different ways of being sometimes in probably such basic terms, but I kind of think of a difference between cat psychology and dog psychology. Dogs, you can tell them what to do. They can be trained. They're happy to be there, want to be part of a pack. Like, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. Like there's the hierarchy, right? Cats, no. Cats come to you if they want to be there. And so cat psychology is, how do I make this attractive? How do I cultivate a way of being that allows this to come to me through its own volition, right? So the difference between control and kind of allowing. And this kind of growth, I think, is often like that. We cannot force this, and we can certainly not be, I mean, we could, not helpful to be upset with ourselves when growth isn't happening the way that we would like it to. But we can absolutely do things to prepare our own environment and cultivate fertile ground for growth to occur. And so what that involves oftentimes is, first, making a commitment to engage in the work, knowing that growth is possible and that it requires some time and energy. And yes, leaning in to probably painful places, but for a very good reason. So it might mean spending some time by yourself, going on long reflective walks, embarking on a journaling practice, or other activities. I mean, I know for me, I want to go sit in hot springs, right? And all the pieces come together. But what is it for you? What are you doing? For some people, it's exercising or through relationships or I don't know, being in the world. But what pushes you into greater contact with yourself? Because it is easy for all of us to get very busy. There are so many things to do and people to see and stuff and whatever, and jobs and tasks, and all of this can be valuable. And hey, you know what? It's okay if you need to go into, I actually don't want to think about this stuff for a while. I need some healthy distraction in my life. And you know what? 3 months from now, this is still going to be there. That's completely fine. You need to have compassion for yourself and listen to what it is that you need. And when the time is right to engage in this work, what helps you do that? Is it therapy? Is it, reading books about this kind of thing? What is it? And then making space in your life for that. We cannot force growth to happen, but by engaging in activities that allow it to happen, you're inviting it in. You're inviting it in. And so I think that is another thing to be very aware of and intentional about. If you've lived through something so hard, be very gentle with yourself. And if you are still actively recovering and are experiencing like the trauma, give yourself a pass. Do this work next year. And when the time is right, think about, if I were going to write a story about a character that all of these things happened to, and now we are in the middle of the book, what would I want that character to do or be or grow into or have by the end of this book? How would I like this person to grow? And what that translates into is this very powerful idea that, your story is not over, and that you do actually have the agency to keep writing this, and you do get to choose how you want this to go. So to be thinking about, who do I want to be? What could I possibly be now? What would be somebody who lived through what I have lived through that, if I saw that from the outside, I would really admire that person. I would think, well, that's kind of awesome. I wish I could be that way. And again, it's not a statement of who you should be, but it's just allowing yourself to dream, to generate ideas, to make contact with what is meaningful to you. What would be a super cool ending for this story? What would that person be into? What would they do? What would be meaningful for them if I thought of something that I could do that would make me feel excited or make me feel that, the things that I've lived through do actually have some kind of higher purpose. And maybe some of it could be spiritual in nature. Spirituality can be extremely helpful and healthy and healing for people who have gone through hard things, and hey, for all of us. But there are also so many ways to connect with higher meaning and purpose that are more secular or psychological in nature. For some people, it can be growing into a more empathetic and understanding and compassionate human because of going through hard things, developing a different level of understanding for the pain of others, to be a better friend and partner and helper in the world can be extremely profound, better parent. And many people, I think, find an enormous amount of meaning and value in acts of service. How can I take something of what I've lived through and be able to help somebody else with this? It could be teaching, it could be mentorship, it could be coaching, it could also just being a role model. It could be a compassionate person, if you're a teacher, a police officer, something that brings us into contact with other humans. There's so many opportunities to be a source of good and light in the world. And even, to find meaning through your work. Our career paths, I think that we often hold them as being very separate from our personal lives. There feels like this separation there. And I think there's a lot of opportunity particularly for people who've lived through difficult things, to think about, what can I do with my talents, my gifts, my abilities, my aptitudes? What does the world need? And how can I use all of these gifts that I've been given in order to serve the world in some kind of positive way, and perhaps even build a career around that, or stay in your same career but find ways to be that light, to find meaning and value in where you are now, right? We don't necessarily have to make big changes in order to be a better person in small and large ways. So all of these are gifts of growth. And if you allow yourself to open up to these experiences and also give yourself support and encouragement from within and also from without, maybe you need a partner in this kind of growth, which is fantastic if you can do that, but allowing yourself to then rebuild a new story, a new chapter. Is it the story that you would have wanted? Is it the book you started reading? No, we had a big fat plot twist. And now, where do you go from here? And let's make it something beautiful. So I hope that this discussion has been helpful for you. I hope that it has provided you with some direction about how to get good, trustworthy help for the early stages of this, but also understanding of how to keep progressing through the later stages of it so that you can build and grow and, not just recover, but go on to flourish, because you deserve that. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And I will be back in touch next week with another episode of the podcast. Take care.